The 911 call came in at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that would change everything. There's a man refusing to leave our HOA office. The woman's voice trembled with manufactured urgency. He's threatening us. Please send help immediately. What she didn't know was that the man she was reporting owned half the town, including the very building she was calling from. Marcus Chen had built his empire from nothing, starting as a teenage immigrant working construction jobs after school. He clawed his way to becoming one of the most successful real estate developers in Pine Valley County. At 42, he owned over 300 properties, employed nearly 200 people, and had just completed the crown jewel of his portfolio, Lake Ranch Estate, a luxury residential community surrounding the pristine Mirror Lake. The development had taken 5 years and $60 million to complete. Every detail was meticulously planned, from the Italian marble in the clubhouse to the custom-designed street lamps that lined the winding roads. Marcus had personally overseen every aspect, ensuring that Lake Ranch would become the most prestigious address in the county. But success breeds enemies, and Marcus had made plenty along the way. The trouble started when the Lake Ranch Homeowners Association held its first official meeting. The community was barely 6 months old, with only 43 of the planned 85 homes occupied. Marcus, as the developer, still held controlling interest in the HOA until the community reached 75% occupancy, a standard industry practice that protected both developer and residents during the transition period. Enter Patricia Whitmore. Patricia was everything Marcus despised about entitled privilege wrapped in designer clothes and dripping with condescension. She'd moved to Lake Ranch from an exclusive Connecticut suburb after her divorce settlement made her a very wealthy woman. At 58, she had the kind of sharp-edged beauty that came from decades of yoga classes, personal trainers, and regular appointments at high-end medical spas. From the moment she purchased the largest lot overlooking the lake, Patricia had made it clear she intended to run things her way. She immediately began organizing the other residents, hosting coffee mornings and wine evenings where she would subtly poison opinions against Marcus and his management company. He thinks he can control us forever, she would whisper over champagne and imported cheese. We need to take back our community from these developers. The racial undertone wasn't lost on anyone who heard her speak. Marcus had faced this kind of prejudice his entire career, but he'd learned to channel it into motivation rather than anger. The confrontation that would change everything began on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Marcus had arrived at the HOA office, located in the elegant community center he designed and built, for a routine meeting with his property management team. The office space was clearly marked with his company's signage, and he'd held the lease since the building's completion. Patricia was waiting for him. She'd somehow obtained keys to the office and had set up what appeared to be her own impromptu HOA meeting with 6 other residents. Papers were spread across the conference table, and she was holding court like a queen addressing her subjects. "Excuse me," Marcus said politely as he entered. "I have a scheduled meeting here in 5 minutes." Patricia looked up with the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "Oh, Marcus, how convenient. We were just discussing some concerns about your management practices. This is my leased office space. Patricia, I'm going to need you to move your meeting to the community room down the hall." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Patricia's smile vanished, replaced by the cold fury of someone who'd never been told no by someone she considered beneath her. "I don't think you understand the situation," she said, standing slowly. "The residents of this community have had enough of your control. We've documented numerous violations of HOA regulations, financial irregularities, and what can only be described as gross mismanagement. Marcus kept his voice level. Patricia, you can discuss any concerns through the proper channels. Right now, I need this space for a business meeting. The proper channels? Patricia's voice rose an octave. You mean the channels that you control, the board that you appointed, the management company that you own? She gestured to the other residents. We represent the true owners of this community, and we're taking it back. What happened next would be replayed in courtrooms, depositions, and news reports for months to come. Patricia reached for her phone with theatrical precision, her manicured fingers dancing across the screen as she dialed those three fateful numbers. 911. What's your emergency? Yes, I need police immediately at Lake Ranch Estate, 1247 Lakeside Drive. There's a man in our HOA office who's refusing to leave. He's becoming aggressive and I'm scared. Marcus watched in stunned silence as Patricia performed for her audience, her voice taking on the trembling quality of a terrified victim. The other residents nodded solemnly, playing their parts in what was clearly a rehearsed production. Please hurry, Patricia continued. He's making threats. I don't know what he might do. As she hung up, Patricia turned to Marcus with a triumphant smirk. You have about 10 minutes to gather your things before the police escort you out of your community. Marcus pulled out his own phone and scrolled to a contact simply labeled Chief. He hit dial and waited for the familiar voice to answer. Hey boss, came the warm greeting from the other end. What can I do for you? The color drained from Patricia's face as the sound carried clearly through the quiet office. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Marcus smiled for the first time that day. Well, Chief Morrison, it seems someone just called 911 to report me as a trespasser in my own building. The silence that followed Marcus's phone call was deafening. Patricia Whitmore's face had gone from triumphant pink to ashen gray in the span of 5 seconds. The other residents shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, suddenly finding the Italian marble floor pattern fascinating to study. Chief Robert Morrison's voice continued through the phone speaker, clear and professional. Marcus, I've got units en route to your location based on a trespassing call. Should I redirect them? No, Chief. Let them come. I think we all need to have a conversation about what constitutes harassment and filing false police reports. Patricia found her voice, though it cracked slightly. This doesn't change anything. You still can't force us out of our own community space. Marcus ended the call and looked directly at her. Patricia, this isn't your community space. This is my leased office in my building on my property. But please, by all means, explain your position to the responding officers. The next few minutes felt like hours. Patricia whispered frantically to her fellow residents, clearly trying to coordinate their story. Marcus simply sat down at his desk and began reviewing the papers they left scattered across his conference table. What he found there made his blood run cold. The documents weren't just complaints or grievances. Patricia and her group had been busy, very busy. They had somehow obtained copies of his property management contracts, his construction permits, even what appeared to be internal financial documents from his company. More disturbing were the handwritten notes in Patricia's distinctive script, outlining the comprehensive plan to force him out of the community entirely. Remove Chen from all management roles by any means necessary. Read one bullet point. Investigate potential financial fraud. Look for any irregularities. Read another. The most chilling was at the bottom. Once we control the board, initiate lawsuit for breach of fiduciary duty, seek damages for emotional distress and property devaluation. Marcus photographed every document with his phone just as the first police cruiser pulled into the parking lot. Officer Jeanne Rodriguez was the first through the door, followed closely by her partner, Officer Mike Stevens. Both had worked with Marcus on various community projects over the years. He donated equipment for the annual police charity auction and had helped fund the new K-9 unit. Afternoon, Mr. Chen, Officer Rodriguez said professionally, "We got a call about a disturbance." Patricia immediately launched into her performance. "Officers, thank goodness you're here. This man forced his way into our HOA meeting and has been verbally threatening us. We asked him to leave repeatedly, but he's refused." Officer Stevens looked around the office, taking note of the clearly marked business signage and the lease agreement prominently displayed on the wall. "Ma'am, can you show me some identification and explain your authorization to be in this office?" The question caught Patricia off guard. "My authorization? I'm the elected representative of the homeowners in this community. Do you have documentation of that election, Mom? And documentation showing you have legal access to this private office space?" As Patricia fumbled for answers, Marcus quietly handed Officer Rodriguez copies of his lease agreement, business license, and the HOA governing documents that clearly showed his company's management authority. The next 20 minutes were a masterclass in how quickly a situation can reverse itself. Patricia's confident demand for Marcus's arrest became stammering explanations about community rights and fighting oppression. Her fellow residents began quietly slipping away, suddenly remembering urgent appointments elsewhere. By the time Chief Morrison arrived, Patricia was alone with Marcus and the two officers. "Bob," Marcus said, using the chief's first name deliberately as Patricia watched. "Thanks for coming personally." Chief Morrison was a 25-year veteran of law enforcement, a straight shooter who'd grown up in Pine Valley County and had watched it transform over the decades. He'd seen Marcus build his business from nothing, had watched him employ local workers, donate to local charities, and contribute more to the community's tax base than any other single entity. "Marcus, what's the situation here?" "I came to my leased office for a scheduled business meeting and found Ms. Whitmore and several residents had broken in and taken over the space. When I asked them to move to the appropriate community room, she called 911 and claimed I was trespassing and making threats." Chief Morrison looked at Patricia, who was now standing alone by the window. Her earlier bravado completely evaporated. "Mom, is that accurate?" We were just trying to protect our community's interests. He has too much power, too much control. Someone needs to stand up to him." By breaking into his office and filing a false police report, Patricia's lawyer arrived 40 minutes later. A sharp-dressed man named Richard Blackstone, who specialized in HOA disputes and had made a career out of suing developers. He immediately demanded all questioning stop and began making veiled threats about lawsuits for discrimination and harassment. But Marcus had already made his decision. That evening, he sat in his home office overlooking Mirror Lake, the same view that had inspired him to buy this land 7 years earlier. His attorney, Sarah Martinez, was on speakerphone discussing their options. "We could file charges for breaking and entering, filing a false police report, harassment," Sarah said. "The evidence is overwhelming." "No," Marcus said quietly, "that's not enough. Patricia Whitmore wants a war. She's about to get one. But we're going to fight this the right way, with lawyers, not police officers. What are you thinking?" Marcus picked up one of the photographs he'd taken of Patricia's documents. The plans she'd outlined weren't just about removing him from management. They were about destroying his reputation, his business, and his life's work. Sarah, I want you to investigate how she obtained my private business documents. I want to know who her contacts are, where her money comes from, and exactly what she's been telling people about me." He paused, watching the lights of his community twinkle around the lake. "And then I want to sue her for defamation, interference with business relationships, and conspiracy." The real fight was just beginning. 6 months later, the Pine Valley County Courthouse had never seen anything quite like Chan v. Whitmore. The media attention had been building for weeks. Local news stations led with stories about the whole war at Lake Ranch, and social media was ablaze with takes about developer greed versus homeowner rights. Marcus arrived at the courthouse that Monday morning in his best Navy suit, flanked by his legal team led by Sarah Martinez. Behind them walked a parade of witnesses, contractors, city officials, bank executives, and dozens of Lake Ranch residents who had grown tired of Patricia's increasingly erratic behavior. Patricia entered from the opposite side of the courthouse steps, surrounded by her own legal army headed by Richard Blackstone. She transformed herself for trial, trading her typical designer outfits for conservative business attire. That screamed victim of corporate oppression. Judge Catherine Wells called the courtroom to order at 9 a.m. sharp. At 6:04, she was known for running a tight ship and having zero tolerance for theatrics. She'd seen enough frivolous lawsuits to spot them from across the county. Sarah Martinez stood for her opening statement, her voice clear and confident. "Your Honor, this case is about a coordinated campaign of harassment, defamation, and illegal surveillance designed to destroy a man's business and reputation. The defendant, Patricia Whitmore, conspired with others to break into Mr. Chen's private office, steal confidential business documents, and launch a systematic attack on his character through false accusations and manufactured crises." Richard Blackstone's opening painted a very different picture. "Your Honor, my client is a homeowner fighting against an out-of-control developer who treats residents like tenants in his personal kingdom. Ms. Whitmore was simply exercising her rights as a community leader when she was subjected to intimidation, threats, and abuse of power." The first week of testimony established the timeline of events. Officer Rodriguez testified about finding Patricia in Marcus's private office, with no legal authority to be there. Chief Morrison explained the false nature of the 911 call, and how Patricia had dramatically embellished her claims of threats and fear. But the real fireworks began when Sarah introduced the surveillance footage. "Your Honor, we'd like to present Exhibit 47, security camera footage from the Lake Ranch Community Center, dated to weeks before the incident in question." The courtroom watched in silence as the large screen showed Patricia and two men in suits examining the building's exterior, testing door handles and peering through windows. The timestamp showed they'd been there for over an hour, clearly conducting surveillance. The two men with Ms. Whitmore, Sarah explained, are private investigators she hired to find ways to access Mr. Chen's private offices and documents. Patricia's face went pale. This footage hadn't been disclosed in discovery. It had been found on a backup server that the IT department had forgotten to mention. Blackstone objected loudly, claiming the footage was inadmissible, but Judge Wells overruled him. The damage was done. The second week brought more devastating evidence. Marcus's IT security consultant testified about digital intrusions into the company's servers, traced back to IP addresses linked to Patricia's home network. Bank records showed she paid over $40,000 to the private investigation firm, far more than necessary for simple HOA research, but Patricia's team had surprises of their own. On Thursday morning, Blackstone called a witness that wasn't on any list, Maria Santos, a former employee of Marcus's construction company. She testified that Marcus had used substandard materials in some Lake Ranch homes, cut corners on inspections, and threatened to fire anyone who complained. The testimony was devastating and completely fabricated. During cross-examination, Sarah Martinez methodically destroyed Maria's credibility. She presented employment records showing Maria had been fired for embezzlement, police reports documenting her harassment of other employees, and a signed confession she'd given to Patricia's investigators admitting she'd agreed to lying. Exchange. For $25,000, the courtroom erupted. Judge Wells banged her gavel repeatedly, threatening to clear the gallery. Maria broke down on the stand, admitting through tears that Patricia had approached her 6 months earlier and offered her money to tell the truth about Marcus Chen's business practices. But the most shocking moment came when Sarah called her. Surprise witness, Patricia's own ex-husband, David Whitmore. David took the stand looking nervous, but determined. He testified that Patricia had called him 3 months earlier, drunk and ranting about destroying that Chinese developer and taking everything he'd built. She'd specifically mentioned having dirt that would ruin Marcus's reputation and force him to sell Lake Ranch at a fraction of its value. She said she'd learned how to fight dirty from our divorce, David testified. She told me she was going to make Marcus Chen pay for every slight, real or imagined, under oath. David revealed that Patricia had a pattern of this behavior. She destroyed the business partnerships in Connecticut using similar tactics, always targeting successful immigrants or minorities who she felt had taken opportunities that should have gone to real Americans. The defense's case collapsed entirely when Sarah introduced phone records showing Patricia had been in contact with Marcus's business competitors, discussing ways to damage his reputation and force him out of upcoming development deals. Patricia's mask finally slipped completely during her own testimony. When Sarah pressed her about the fabricated evidence and paid witnesses, Patricia exploded. "He doesn't belong here," she screamed, pointing at Marcus. "People like him come to our communities and take over everything. They change our neighborhoods, they control our lives, and they think they can get away with it because they have money." The racist outburst hung in the air like poison gas. Judge Wells stared at Patricia with undisguised disgust, while several jurors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Blackstone desperately tried to control the damage, but it was too late. Patricia had revealed her true motivation, and it had nothing to do with HOA governance or homeowner rights. As the trial moved toward closing arguments, everyone in the courtroom knew the verdict was no longer in question. The only remaining mystery was just how much Patricia Whitmore's hatred was going to cost her. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they filed back into the courtroom that Friday afternoon, Patricia Whitmore sat rigid in her chair, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the defense table. The confident woman who had orchestrated this campaign of destruction looked small and defeated. Aged years and just 2 weeks of trial, Judge Wells called the court to order as jury foreman Robert Kim stood to deliver the verdict in the matter of Chen versus Whitmore. On the count of defamation, we find for the plaintiff in the amount of $400,000. On the count of interference with business relationships, we find for the plaintiff in the amount of $200,000. On the count of conspiracy and harassment, we find for the plaintiff in the amount of $100,000. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. $700,000 in damages was substantial, but Sarah Martinez wasn't finished. "Your Honor, We also seek punitive damages based on the defendant's pattern of malicious conduct and racial animus. Judge Wells nodded grimly. Given the evidence of deliberate fraud, perjury, and what can only be described as a hate-motivated campaign, I'm awarding an additional $300,000 in punitive damages. Total judgment, $1 million. Patricia Maida. Sounds somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Her Lake Ranch mansion was worth $1.2 million, meaning she'd likely have to sell everything to pay the judgment. But as the gavel fell, Sarah Martinez leaned over to whisper something in Marcus's ear. His eyes widened, and he nodded slowly. "Your Honor," Sarah said, standing. "My client would like to make a statement." Marcus rose and walked to the podium, looking directly at Patricia for the first time since her racist outburst. The courtroom was dead silent. "Ms. Whitmore," he began, his voice steady and calm. "You tried to destroy me because you believed I didn't belong in your community. You saw my success as somehow taking something away from you rather than adding value to all of us." Patricia refused to meet his eyes, staring down at her hands. "But here's what you never understood. I didn't build Lake Ranch for myself. I built it for people like you, people who wanted something beautiful and exclusive. The irony is that everything you tried to take from me, you actually had a right to enjoy alongside me." He paused, letting that sink in. "I'm prepared to forgive the debt. All $1 million. On one condition." The courtroom collectively held its breath. Patricia's head snapped up, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time in weeks. "You leave Lake Ranch immediately and sign a statement acknowledging your actions were motivated by racial prejudice. That statement will be published in the Pine Valley Tribune, and you'll attend sensitivity training for 1 year." Before Patricia could respond, the courtroom doors burst open. FBI agent Jennifer Hayes strode down the aisle, her badge clearly visible, followed by 2 other federal agents. "Patricia Whitmore," Agent Hayes announced, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, mail fraud, and civil rights violations." The courtroom exploded into chaos. Judge Wells banged her gavel repeatedly as Patricia was handcuffed. Right there at the defense table, her face a mask of shock and terror as the agents led her away. Agent Hayes approached Marcus. "Mr. Chen, thank you for your cooperation in our investigation. The documents you provided about Ms. Whitmore's conspiracy with your business competitors led us to a much larger fraud scheme. The twist that no one had seen coming began to unfold. In the days following Patricia's arrest, the FBI investigation revealed that Patricia hadn't been acting alone. She was part of a network of activists who targeted successful minority developers across 3 states, using identical tactics to force them into bankruptcy or sell their properties at below-market prices. The scheme was orchestrated by a white supremacist group that had adopted sophisticated legal and financial tactics instead of traditional violence. They would identify successful minority-owned businesses, infiltrate their communities or customer bases, and launch coordinated harassment campaigns designed to destroy reputations and financial stability. Patricia had been recruited 2 years earlier through online forums where she complained about demographic changes in her Connecticut neighborhood. The group had provided her with funding, legal support, and detailed playbooks for targeting Marcus, specifically the private investigators, the paid witnesses, even her move to Lake Ranch itself. All of it had been carefully orchestrated as part of a federal conspiracy that was now crumbling under FBI scrutiny. Maria Santos, the former employee who had perjured herself, agreed to cooperate with federal investigators in exchange for leniency. Her testimony revealed that Patricia's group had targeted at least 12 other developers across California, Nevada, and Arizona, with devastating success in 8 cases. 3 months later, Patricia Whitmore pleaded guilty to federal conspiracy charges and was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. The house at Lake Ranch was seized as part of restitution payments to victims of the broader conspiracy. Marcus stood on his deck that evening, watching the sunset paint Mirror Lake in shades of gold and crimson. The community was thriving now, 90% occupied, with a waiting list of prospective buyers. The residents, who had remained loyal throughout the ordeal, had formed genuine friendships, bonded by their shared experience. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Martinez. Patricia's house goes to auction next week. Minimum bid is $800,000. You interested in expanding your lakefront property? Marcus smiled and typed back, "No thanks. I think I'll donate it to the county for a community center. Something tells me this neighborhood could use more ways for people to come together." As the last light faded from the lake, Marcus reflected on the strange journey that had brought him to this moment. He'd won more than a legal victory. He'd helped expose and dismantle a network of hatred that had been poisoning communities across the country. The real justice wasn't in the courtroom verdict or even Patricia's imprisonment. It was in the community that had chosen unity over division, truth over lies, and hope over hate. Lake Ranch had become exactly what he'd always envisioned, a place where anyone could build something beautiful, regardless of where they came from or what they looked like. The American dream, reflected perfectly in the still waters of Mirror Lake.